Right, so we have another 8 Passengers update, and specifically in today's video, we're going to be taking a look at a lot more neighbours that have came out and released statements talking about what they saw over the years with 8 Passengers, Ruby, Franke and the kids. And unsurprisingly, it's really fucking bad. We're getting more details by the day, by the hour, and it keeps getting worse. And these neighbours have been seeing it going on for years and been trying to get them help, and nothing has happened. And when we get to these quotes, it just validates everything that pretty much everyone has been saying for years, right? We were saying there is definitely reason to be worried about what is happening in that household off camera, and like I said, this just validates it because neighbours have seen it firsthand, and yeah, it's really bad. Let's get into this. Actually, before we get specifically into the neighbours' comments, it is worth noting that Kevin Franke, you know, the dad, was actually seen at the family home recently. This was on Saturday, 2 days ago, and he was actually seen outside the home removing the 8 Passengers logo from his van, which for some reason was still on there, even though they haven't uploaded on that channel for God knows how long. This was the back of their van. They had the YouTube logo and 8 Passengers, which I don't know why they'd want that much negative attention around them when they're on the roads, because no one's had a good opinion on 8 Passengers for a good 5 or so years now. But yeah, here's a picture of the van now. It has been removed. It's mental that it took something this serious for it to get it removed, because like I said, their reputation has been bad for ages. Now, one thing I did find interesting with Kevin that we find out in these articles is, obviously we've knew for a while that Ruby and Kevin had split, but we didn't know what had happened. We didn't know if it was Kevin's choice to split. Maybe he saw what Ruby was doing on the Connexions page and didn't want to be a part of it anymore. And maybe it was the other way around and Ruby wanted to split, right? We still don't really know, but one detail that is said in this is Franke kicked her husband Kevin out of the home last year, a source of knowledge of their relationship said. Now, obviously we don't know if this definitely means that Ruby got rid of Kevin and didn't want anything to do with him anymore, right? We don't know if it was her choice. But I really wouldn't be surprised, because like I've mentioned in previous videos, Ruby has always been bad. Hence why the video's been coming out for years now. But it has been a lot worse over the last year or so since this connection stuff. And obviously we've mentioned the theories that Jodie is kind of like brainwashing Ruby, and she has just spewed some utter shite in Ruby's brain, and it has made her a lot worse. So for me personally, I wouldn't be surprised if it was Jodie who got in Ruby's head and was talking to her about how Kevin isn't right for her and that they should split and stuff, because Jodie has done this multiple times throughout the years. Remember, Jodie was a marriage counsellor. She had a license removed or suspended momentarily, and she had to have supervision in the future when she was doing this counselling, because there was tons of people who went to her for marriage counselling, and she tried to split them up. She tried to ruin the marriage. And this has been going on for the best part of a decade. There's countless amounts of people that have spoke about their experiences that are very similar to each other, and it wouldn't be surprised if Jodie did this with Ruby and Kevin too. It's really weird. Like, I don't know what Jodie gets out of this. It genuinely seems like she's trying to go out of her way just to ruin marriages. Like, that's something that interests her for some reason. But again, this is kind of just speculation, right? We don't know 100% exactly what's happened here. I just thought that statement was a bit interesting. But getting to the neighbours' statements, there are multiple neighbours that have spoke out recently, and the statements have been released within the last 24 hours. And they're incredibly worrying, and it paints a picture of kind of what's been going on for so long now. I mean, we have a quote here that says, "Everyone is just breathing a collective sigh of relief, because we thought they were going to come out of that house with body bags." Like, the fact that a neighbour would even think that this could be possible just says so much about Ruby and what these neighbours have seen throughout the years. Like, that thought would never come to my mind in a million years if I saw, like, a police car on my street. They've clearly seen a lot from Ruby in the past that would make them think this, and yeah, it's extremely worrying. Also, this article goes on to say that a video was actually shared with NBC News, the people who made this article, and says law enforcement officers surrounded the home with guns drawn. In a second video, at least 7 police vehicles line the street. NBC News saw a photo provided by a neighbour showing what appears to be a hole in the home's front door. Now, this hole in the door, I'm assuming, is from them getting into the home, right? They had to basically break down the door to get in, which makes me think that either nobody was home or Jodie just refused to open the door, because obviously we know now that apparently Ruby was going for a family emergency and that's why she wasn't at the home. Who knows if that's just an excuse? But I've heard very conflicting statements about where Jodie was. People say that she was at the home. That's what the majority I've seen say. Some people say that the kids were home alone. Like, the articles have been very conflicting. But as we go further down this article, we hear some more experiences between Ruby and some of the neighbours, because apparently Ruby would lecture the neighbours about certain things in their own home. Neighbours said Franke would insert herself into the other neighbours' lives. One neighbour cited an instance where Franke would give a sermon-like lecture over what she called inappropriate posters of women posing in shorts that were displayed in a garage. So yeah, she would actually go to a neighbour's home and lecture them about pictures that they have in their own home. And by the sounds of it, obviously we don't know what the pictures are like, it seems like they were just like modelling pictures, right? That someone had up in their own garage. But yeah, this doesn't surprise me in the slightest. We literally saw a video where Ruby had a full-blown meltdown because the school were playing a song by Flo Rida and the lyrics were too like edgy for her, and she started crying in the car and screaming about it. So yeah, this really doesn't surprise me. Neighbours accused Franke of withholding food as punishment for her children, behaviour that was also shared to her YouTube channel, the clip we've seen like a million times now. They also claimed that after her husband was out of the home, Franke would leave the house for weeks at a time with the children inside. Again, this is something that we have heard, and a bunch of neighbours have confirmed this, which is incredibly worrying. Like, how are you going to leave very young children at home for weeks at a time? I'd remember that she took away their Christmas one year, the male neighbour said, and she would say things like, they're not repenting correctly, which is a Mormon term for they're sinning, just complete insanity. Yeah, this was a clip that we covered at the time, I believe 2 Christmases ago now, where it actually started on Connexions. I think this was one of the first times we covered Connexions. And it was basically Ruby and Kevin sat next to each other, telling the audience why they chose not to give 2 of their kids Christmas presents, but give the other kids Christmas presents. And it was basically to teach them a lesson. An absolutely disgusting thing to do to especially very young children who, let's be honest here, probably didn't do anything wrong. Now, this next part in the article is so fucking sad, and yeah, this genuinely like broke my heart when I read this. The male neighbour recalled how Franke's youngest daughter, Eve, who was about 10 years old, would wander the neighbourhood whilst her mother was away for prolonged periods after she kicked Kevin Franke out the house. Eve would look for companions in the community, the neighbours said. The neighbours said it did not seem like she was attending school. Yeah, this is something that Ruby spoke about in videos before. She has spoke about how she decided to take her kids out of school and homeschool them instead. And now in hindsight, that we know these details, it's incredibly worrying, right? The kids were at home 24/7 whilst this was going on, and it does make me think, again, speculation here, is this the reason that she decided to homeschool her children and not let them go to school because she knew this is what she was doing at home and didn't want people to know? Again, speculation, right? That's not based on fact or anything, that's just my opinion, but I mean, it's something to think about. She would just knock on your door and say, hi, can your kids play? And we're like, well, they're at school, they won't be home for 3 or 4 hours, and she'd be like, I'll wait. He added, she's like this lost child. Incredibly fucking sad, right? We're talking about a child here who wasn't able to go to school because her parents decided she was going to be homeschooled, and she would just try her best to try and make friends in the neighbourhood. Obviously, they're at school at the time, and she's just wandering the street by herself while her mother's decided to go away for weeks. And the most mental part about all of this is that Ruby Franke has a parental advice page. Like, I keep forgetting about this because these details are horrifying enough. But how does this woman feel like she has the right to tell other parents how to look after their children when she's never done it? Genuinely, and I mean this, right? Probably the most delusional person I've ever seen. Like, she treated her children like absolute shite. The worst type of way you could treat children, right? And then she decides to try and give other mothers advice on how they can be better parents. I genuinely don't know how you can be that delusional. Now, here in a different article, we have more quotes from the neighbours talking about how hard they actually tried to do something about this and let the authorities know. I'm really angry because I spoke up, other people spoke up, and nothing happened, another female neighbour explained. I want those kids to know that the community loves them and wants them to be safe. If people knew the amount of tears and time spent talking with law enforcement and CPS over the last year, I want people to understand that, and I want those kids to know that because I think they thought they were abandoned. Again, just putting in perspective how bad this has been, the neighbours have been aware of this for over a year, and they've been trying to help out. Like she said here, there's been a bunch of tears just seeing what is happening to these children. They've tried talking to law enforcement multiple times over last year and nothing was happening. And it really does blow my mind because it seems like every single person in the world who knew about Ruby and Geordie were worried, were incredibly worried about what's happening to them children. And they thought there was a big possibility that something bad is really happening. You have YouTubers, TikTokers, just a bunch of people online, people who just comment on stuff, right? Everyone is incredibly worried. But then on top of that, you have the neighbours who are seeing it firsthand, in person, and they're incredibly worried. Like, what else has to happen for people to get involved, like the law enforcement to get involved? Now, one other thing I do want to mention is they have a picture of Geordie's house in this article, a few pictures of it, in fact. And I'm not going to show it on screen, because I don't want to show, like, at a private address, right? But one thing I will say, looking at this picture, it is genuinely in the middle of nowhere. It's just completely covered by a field. It looks almost like a desert. There are a few houses there, but it genuinely looks like it's in the middle of nowhere, and that really does make me think, why did they choose to move into Geordie's house and not Ruby's? And I mean, Ruby's was in a pretty busy neighbourhood from the picture that we saw, and Geordie's was kind of in the middle of nowhere where they can really do whatever they want, right? And there's like a very limited amount of people that can see it. Again, speculation, right? It's just something to think about, but yeah, I mean, I really wouldn't be surprised if that was the case. Also, the house is huge, by the way. It looks like a bungalow, but it's like a fucking big bungalow. It's very like wide and long, like there's a lot of rooms, it seems. And yeah, I don't know where Jodie's got all this money from. I realise that maybe some areas are cheaper than others, but it's a big house that I don't understand. Like, surely that can't just all be from like marriage counselling. But yeah, I also nearly missed another statement that was made by the neighbours here, because there's so many of them, but this one is also extremely worrying. One thing we noticed, and we told the police the same thing: 6 to 8 weeks ago, when it was really hot, I was outside in the late morning / afternoon pulling weeds, and over at Jodie's home, several kids were also outside her home pulling weeds. Over the course of the day, the temperature was over 100 degrees, and I gave up after a while because it was so hot, but I noticed the kids stayed out there, the neighbour explained. Now, I don't actually know how hot 100 degrees is in Fahrenheit. Let me just look. So it's pretty much 38 degrees Celsius, which is ridiculously hot. And I struggle to believe that the kids were out there by choice, just pulling weeds, you know? So it maybe does seem like, and I'm assuming that's what the neighbours get into here, that they were kind of made to do that. And if that is the case, again, extremely, extremely worrying, especially when it's that hot to be like working outside. Very young children doing this, by the way. Like, yeah, it's extremely worrying. But yeah, either way, that is the updates that we have so far. Like I said, it is a bunch of just statements from neighbours talking about what they've seen over the years, which adds a lot of context to this. And yeah, it does get more worrying by the day, which is very unfortunate. And I'll say it again, I've said it in pretty much every video so far, hopefully justice is served. There's more and more evidence coming out every single day. So you would like to think that justice is served, right? Also, like I've mentioned in previous videos, obviously not a professional law, right? I haven't done like a law degree or anything, but I have been trying to look at people's opinions on how long they think Ruby could potentially get, you know, if she is found guilty of this. And obviously we've seen that each count has like a maximum of 15 years. I do realise, even without being a pro-law, that it's probably not going to be 15 years for each count. But I've seen very different answers of what people think will come from this. Some people will say like 5-6 years. Some people genuinely think it'd be less than a year, which, if it is that, like, that'd be fucking disgusting. But yeah, I guess we'll find out one day. It'll be a very long time away. This stuff does take time, but we will find out eventually. And yeah, I'm going to leave a video there. But yeah, I would love to know your opinions in the comment section down below of everything we spoke about in today's video. If you are new, please subscribe and all that stuff. And until the next one, I'll see you guys in a bit. Alright, goodbye.